Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Ken Johnson, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming to you today from Jacksonville, Illinois, with a garden bite. And on this week's garden bite, we're going to continue our look at the 2025 year of plants. And for this week, we're going to talk about Calendula. So Calendula is a genus of about 15 to 20 species of either annual or perennial herbaceous plants. And they are in the aster or daisy family, or Asteraceae. And in many places of the world, they were referred to as marigolds because of their bright orange color. Here in the U.S., the plants we call, or commonly referred to as marigolds, are in the genus Tagetes, which are native to Central and South America, whereas Calendula is native to Europe, North Africa, West Asia, kind of that Mediterranean region. The most commonly grown species of the species, if you're growing calendula, more than likely you're going to be growing is going to be Calendula officinalis. And this is believed to be native to Southern Europe, but it is so widespread and been grown for such a long time, they're not entirely sure where that species originates from, but more than likely somewhere in Southern Europe. The genus Calendula comes from Latin, from the word calendae, meaning first day of the month. And the ancient Romans, observed that these plants were blooming on the first day of the month almost every month, which gave rise to this genus name. And that specific epithet or that species, the officinalis, that means sold in shops and is often given to plant species that were believed to have medicinal properties. So Calendula officinalis, has been used for a variety of different reasons throughout the centuries. It's been grown as an ornamental since at least Roman times. Again, it has very pretty flowers, long bloom season, so makes a good ornamental plant. Another good thing about Calendula is that they are very attractive to pollinators. So we have a variety of different bees that will visit them of various sizes. Flies, syrphid flies, and other types of pollinating flies will visit them. You may find beetles visiting them, feeding on the pollen. Even wasps will visit them as well for the pollen and nectar. So it can be a very good plant to include in a pollinator garden as well. The plants are about 2.5 feet tall. There are some dwarf varieties that are about a foot tall. The stems are covered in fine hairs, and the leaves of the straight species or kind of that quote unquote wild type can be sticky and aromatic. But in a lot of our modern day cultivars, those qualities have been greatly reduced in them. So you may not experience that depending on the type of calendula you're growing. They will produce 2 to 3 inch, sometimes 4-inch daisy-like flowers. Typically, they're going to be a bright orange to yellow in color, but there have been some white cultivars that have been bred, something like Ivory Princess, and there are also bicolored cultivars that have been developed as well. So you have yellow and orange flowers on those plants. There are also semi-double and double blooms that can be found as well. So again, there's a good diversity of flower color and flower shape for these plants. They will bloom over a long period of time. So once they start blooming, they will bloom almost continuously until we have a heavy frost or a hard frost, especially if we deadhead the plants. And they also make good cut flowers. So a very good ornamental plant, looks good, planted in mass on borders. A very good garden plant. It can have very many uses in the garden. Like I mentioned earlier, officinalis refers to plants that are often believed to have medicinal properties. So Calendula officinalis was used medicinally at times. Wasn't necessarily a major medicinal herbs back in the day, so to speak, but it was used occasionally to treat different ailments. It was also believed to have magical properties. So if you mixed it with some other things and stuff, it is believed that you could be able to see fairies with it. It was also used sometimes to help a woman choose between two suitors. So again, you take the calendula petals, mix them with some herbs, and rub those on yourself. And in the woman's dreams, if the suitor was nice to her in her dreams, he would be faithful. And if he wasn't so nice to her, would be unfaithful and would help her choose her suitor. And the major kind of traditional use for calendula has been for cooking. So another name for calendula is pot marigold, or Calendula officinalis is pot marigold, because it was used often in broths or soups as a kind of a pot herb, just something to mix in there with whatever soup or herb, or if you're roasting something, it was commonly used for that. So the petals are edible. They can be used fresh in salads. They can be dried. They were traditionally used to color cheese or as a substitute for saffron, which gives rise to another one of its common names, a poor man's saffron, because it will impart this a nice orange color to things that it's cooked with. It's said to have a mildly sweet taste that is slightly bitter, and as it dries, these flavors become more intense. So some people may find that objectionable. So before you use a whole bunch of it, try a little bit first to make sure you like it. So again, used to color soups, stews, used in poultry dishes, liqueurs, all kinds of different things. So if you're interested in growing some calendula yourself, this plant does best in full sun, into partial shade. In hotter areas of the country, partial afternoon shade can be helpful. This doesn't really like a really hot temperature, so help keep it a little bit cooler. But if it gets too much shade, it's going to become really leggy, and the number of blooms is going to be reduced. So if you're going to give it shade, afternoon shade, but don't overdo it. These plants are very easy to start from seeds, and the seeds are quite interesting looking. They're about a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch long, curved or hooked in shape, look like a sickle, maybe a bent nail. Sometimes they'll have little spikes on them, not really sharp, but little projections on them. And because of their relatively large size, it's easy for kids to pick these up. So if you've got kids or grandkids that are interested in helping start some seeds, this may be a good plant to have them help start because of their size. And these can be direct sown into the garden just before the last frost date, or they can be started indoors 6 to 8 weeks. Some people do 3 to 4 weeks before that last frost. Again, to kind of get a jump start on those and get those blooming a little bit earlier in the season. Unfortunately for these, the seeds don't last terribly long, about a year or so. So this is one, it's probably going to be best to buy new seed every year and not hold on to seed over subsequent years, because you tend not to have very good germination on older seed. Once they're planted, seeds will usually germinate within 5 to 15 days. So relatively quick if the soils and the temperatures are warm enough. Once the plants are a few inches tall, you can pinch them back. And this is going to help you get bushier plants if you want that look. And these plants are going to do best in kind of moderate soil. They don't necessarily need a lot of fertilizer, moderate watering. So pretty low maintenance when it comes to fertilizer or watering potentially. Obviously, if we have a drought, you're still going to have to give them some water, but they don't need a tremendous amount of water. Again, deadheading regularly is going to encourage bloom. So if you want that season-long bloom, you want to look at deadheading, or look at maybe doing some succession planting plants every few weeks if you don't want to have to deadhead. If you don't deadhead, those plants will often produce seed, and those seeds will often self-sow. So if you're not deadheading and you're fine with these, you may end up with a nice healthy patch of calendula over time. Because these do oftentimes like a little bit cooler temperatures, again, in really hot, humid conditions, they may struggle a little bit, so they can be cut back to help promote fall flowering if they're looking a little ragged after the summer. Again, plants can tolerate some frost, but once we get a hard frost or temperatures really start getting down into the 20s, they will die. But they are perennial in zones 9 to 11. But unfortunately, it gets a little bit too cold here in Illinois to keep these around as a perennial. They are also relatively pest-free. You can have problems occasionally with aphids on them, powdery mildew, and interestingly, blister beetles. So I have seen blister beetles feeding on these. Typically, populations don't get high enough to cause a lot of problems, maybe some unsightliness here and there. With blister beetles, if they are crushed, they have a chemical in their bodies. They can cause burns, so be careful when handling these. But they are an interesting beetle. The adults are feeding on plant material, whereas the larvae are predaceous. So the female blister beetles will lay their eggs in the soil. The larvae will hatch. That first instar will crawl around, find grasshopper eggs, burrow into the egg chamber, and then it will molt into a legless grub. And the blister beetle larvae will feed on grasshopper eggs and then emerge the following year. So, but that's another story for another podcast. So, again, calendula is another one of the 2025 plants of the year. Very good ornamental plants, easy to grow, provide a lot of good color, a season-long color to really any part of the garden, and also makes a good cut flower. That's all I've got for you for this week's Garden Bite. The Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension. Thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening, or if you're watching on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.